Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Kelly. I am the program host with the Community Relations Department at Rochester Hills Public Library. Welcome to this evening's program, the Grotesque 10 Amazing Architectural Sculptures from 10 American Colleges and Universities, with photographer and guest speaker, Mathew Duman. Join us on Tuesday, March 2nd at 7 p.m. for a program about the dangers of alcohol and prescription drug abuse, co-hosted by the Rochester Area Youth Assistants, the Rochester Area Youth Assistants. And we will leave time for questions at the end of tonight's presentation after we've gone through the actual presentation. You can leave those in the chat. Audience will remain muted throughout the program for tonight, but please leave any questions in the chat and I will read them to our presenter through a sort of moderated Q&A after the program ends. And this program tonight will be recorded and it will be available about 1 week from today on the library's YouTube channel at rhpl.org. So like I said, about 1 week from tonight, I should have that uploaded for you guys and it will be sent out to everyone who's registered for the program. And finally, I'd like to thank the Friends of the Rochester Hills Public Library for helping to financially support all of our programs with their many fundraisers. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our host for the evening, Mathew Duman. Mathew, take it away.
Years ago, Mathew Duman embarked on a grotesque safari, trekking thousands of miles to 10 American institutions of higher education in search of their most fascinating architectural sculpture. At last he returned with hundreds of images, revealing the grotesque secrets of the Grotesque 10, amazing architectural sculpture from 10 American colleges and universities. Hello everyone, my name is Mathew Duman, and welcome to the Grotesque 10. I may be wondering why I'm dressed like this. Well, that's because I'm going to take you on a grotesque safari, to a place where you can observe the behavior of gargoyles and grotesques in their natural habitat. In other words, the American college campus. So let's get started. Many years ago, I noticed this sculpture at Yale University. It not only sparked my interest in the grotesques and gargoyles at Yale, it led me to explore other universities in search of interesting sculpture. Now you may be thinking, well, what's so interesting about this one and what does it even mean? Well, it is a bit confusing, but I'm going to keep you in suspense on the meaning until the end of my lecture. But keep this image in your head. 10. It's a nice round number, isn't it? In this case, it refers to the number of institutions of higher education that I have visited. Now, many of these schools are quite well known, but I did not choose them for their reputation or academic prowess. I chose them because each is a collection of artwork on the campus that I find very interesting. I'm not talking about items in their museums or archives, but sculpture on many of their academic buildings themselves. Each is examples of a building style called collegiate Gothic architecture, a characteristic style which is a revival of the Gothic architectural style of medieval Europe, yet was actually constructed in America in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Like their medieval cousins, many of these buildings are decorated with fascinating sculpture, which are referred to architecturally as grotesques. Therefore, my book is called The Grotesque 10. It features amazing architectural sculpture from 10 American colleges and universities. This sculpture can be particularly interesting because while it's meant to look ancient, it can possess modern concepts and themes. What schools make up the Grotesque 10? Well, I'm glad, sorry. Go back. What schools make up the Grotesque 10? Well, I'm glad you asked. There are a variety. Some were founded in the 19th century, and even a few from the 18th, but all possess some form of architectural sculpture on their campus buildings. The 10 schools featured in my book are Bryn College in Pennsylvania, Duke University in North Carolina, Northwestern University in Illinois, Princeton University in New Jersey, Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, the City College of New York in New York City, Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, the University of Chicago in Illinois, the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and because I keep finding new sculpture there even after years of exploring, Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. Now, in case you're wondering if there's anything from Michigan, I don't have anything in my book, but I might have put a few bonus images at the end of the lecture from Michigan. So we'll just have to wait and see. Gothic architecture came out of medieval Europe, but even back then it was not new to decorate buildings with sculptural flourishes. But in medieval times, it was common to apply sculpture to churches and cathedrals to scare away evil spirits, or on a more practical level, to graphically demonstrate lessons of morality from the church, because much of the parish population at the time were illiterate. Universities at this time were closely associated with the church. Often, academic life was centered around a cathedral, so the architecture of the church greatly influenced that of university buildings. This carried through to modern times. See the shape of the windows, the use of spires and roughly cut stone in the walls in this building from Duke University. Now, when we look at these buildings, are we to believe multiple groups of architects, masons, glaziers, and other artisans came to North America during the medieval period and set about constructing Gothic building projects in far-flung places on a wild and unexplored continent? Well, if you believe this, then contact me after the lecture. I've got some lucrative investment opportunities for you. So in other words, no, of course not. Examples like this are obviously much younger than those in medieval Europe. The collegiate Gothic trend became popular in the mid-19th century and remained so through the 1930s, and is actually still in use today. Rockefeller Hall was built at Bryn, Mawr in 1904. Bass Tower was constructed at Yale University in 2017. So why did college architects look backward for inspiration when designing campus buildings? Well, not surprisingly, a big reason was financial. Even the oldest colleges in North America are new compared to the old world institutions of Europe. American colleges also lack the cultural status that those of Europe had. And 150 years ago, our universities were not looked upon with the nostalgia and respect that they are today. Reviving venerable building traditions like Gothic was a great way to create an unspoken connection with the long-established universities of Europe. This connection elevates the status and prestige of American colleges and society, and in turn, their endowments and donations as well. There are a variety of historic styles. Many of these and other campuses have buildings that were built in other architectural styles, such as the Georgian style from 18th century England, or the classical style from ancient Greece. Honestly, most college campuses have become a mixture of many different styles. So why choose to revive Gothic for your college campus? Well, by the mid-19th century, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Though there were many positive advancements due to industrialization, many came to see mass production as a threat to individuality and individual craftsmanship. Gothic was seen to celebrate the individual and individual expression. Think of the distinction between something that's handmade versus something that's mass-produced. Also, in a practical sense, Gothic encourages asymmetry, like this building at Duke. This plan better fit the variety of uses collegiate buildings have to accommodate, such as athletic facilities, lecture halls, laboratories, dormitories, libraries, etc. Different functions that require different types of space. And most importantly for our examination, Gothic architecture is seen as timeless. Generally, Gothic-style buildings look old, no matter what the actual age of the building is. Now, I know it's cliche, but it can be said that universities are like a fine wine. Wines improve with age, and schools are seen in the same fashion. This concept is not lost on architects. While you can't change the actual age of a building, you can change the perceived age of it, or how old it looks to be. In fact, these architects use many subtle, and some would say sneaky, techniques to enhance the age of their buildings. At Duke University, you can find some staircases which are worn from so many years of footsteps that the tread of the steps is grooved. These stairs have actually been molded with a groove in them from the beginning. These steps are meant to show the wear of many hundreds of years of footsteps on a staircase that, in actuality, is not yet 100 years old. These were built in 1938. Another technique involves the roofs of these buildings. Most collegiate Gothic structures have slate rock shingling in their roofs. Look closely and you'll see many imperfections in the shingles, chips, cracks in the slate, and rough, uneven surfaces, speaking of hundreds of years of exposure to the elements. As in the case of the stairs, many of these roofs were intentionally created this way, with chips and discolorations purposefully added. Other aging techniques involve the building of the walls themselves. Random window frames may have no glass and look to have been blocked up years after construction. These features are intended to give the building the look of sporadic renovations over hundreds of years, when in fact the building was originally constructed with many of these features from the start, like this false arched window at Yale University. And look at this blocked up window at the City College of New York. Notice the presence of the iron bars to enhance the illusion that this was once a real window. But think about it. Why would they leave the iron bars there after sealing the window? And what practical purpose do they serve now? What criminal would try to break into a window that's now as solid as the wall around it? One decorative feature commonly seen in these buildings is the architectural niche. They are a tall, thin alcove, usually featuring a decorative canopy at the top and a flat platform at the base. They look like the perfect place for a statue, and some do contain just that. But more often than not, they are empty. These were intentionally left empty. You're supposed to assume that all these spaces were originally filled with dignified sculpture, but throughout the building's quote-unquote long and colorful history, most of these statues were stolen, destroyed, or just plain removed, when in actuality, most of these features were empty from the beginning. And lastly, never underestimate the aging effect of a good garnish of ivy. Mendel Hall at the University of Chicago dates from the late 19th century. Looks positively ancient when encased in ivy. These aging techniques are meant to work on passersby at an almost subliminal level, unconsciously leading you to draw the conclusion that these buildings are generally pretty darn old. You don't know how old, but definitely much older than any man-made structure nearby. This brings us to my favorite feature of Gothic buildings, grotesques. Putting sculpted decoration on collegiate Gothic buildings is a direct extension of the Gothic traditions of European architecture. Many early collegiate Gothic buildings have grotesques featuring medieval imagery, such as this king from the University of Chicago, another way to strengthen the connection between the institutions of the new and the old worlds. In architectural terms, a grotesque is a sculpted decoration on or in a building, and usually is representative of a human, animal, or fanciful creature whose form may be exaggerated to the point of caricature. A gargoyle is one type of grotesque. This is a specific kind which is used to channel rainwater off of the roof and away from the building, so as to protect the masonry from erosion. So it's essentially a decorative rain spout, hence the modern verb to gargle. I've already demonstrated how these buildings can mislead you, and the world of grotesques is no exception. This sculpture from the University of Chicago looks like a gargoyle, but look closely. It does not have a pipe or channel to drain water. I call these false gargoyles. While they're intended to look like gargoyles, they're just regular grotesques. To make it easier to understand, I've divided grotesques into categories based on their subject matter. When I began establishing categories for grotesques, I originally referred to them as different species to show that, like animals, grotesques can come in a wide variety of types, until I found there was a fatal flaw in this analogy. By definition, two animals of different species cannot produce offspring, no matter what the sci-fi channel may tell you. So you'll never see a sharktopus or a whale wolf. By the way, this image is not in my book. But different breeds of animal reproduce all the time, like mixed breed dogs or cats. I find these types of grotesque to be a fascinating mix of meanings. Often, you need to look at them many times in order to interpret the different messages contained within, because they may combine the characteristics of multiple breeds. A basic breed of grotesque are those of the historic variety. They portray something about the history of their building, its area of study, the school, town, state, or even country. At the back of Yale's Sterling Memorial Library, two reliefs depict similar occurrences, but set 212 years apart. Yale was founded in 1701 in Branford, Connecticut. The school built a college house in New Haven in 1718. One relief depicts the transport of Yale's books via ox cart to the new building in New Haven, while the other portrays the unloading of books from other Yale libraries from a gasoline-powered truck to the newly built Sterling Memorial Library in 1930. Demonstrative grotesque simply depicts some aspect of the purpose of their building. Howe's Chapel is part of the Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary on the campus of Northwestern University in Illinois. The finial on its roof depicts two hands clasped together in prayer, a preview of the activity commonly found inside the chapel. The demonstrative grotesque seems a pretty straightforward concept, but things can get confusing as time moves on and buildings change their function. Rosenwald Hall at the University of Chicago serves as the admissions building, but began life as home to the Department of Geology. This explains the relief portraying a saddlebag, rock hammers, fossils of sea life, and the slogan, "Dig and discover" below. These Gothic buildings can also have the breed of grotesque that convey their meaning through allegory and symbols, as in the front of Northwestern University's Deering Library, where allegorical grotesques teach time-honored lessons, like a winged hourglass for time flies, or a tortoise that crawls slowly past a sleeping hare, recalling Aesop's fable and proclaiming haste makes waste. An important breed of grotesque is those of the school spirit variety. They usually consist of a representation of the school's mascot or another symbol relating to the institution's identity. Trinity's mascot is the bantam, a particularly stubborn and scrappy rooster, and likenesses can be found on flanking the archway at the Downs Memorial Clock Tower. This gentleman is not the City College of New York's mascot, but he is displaying the school's seal. And Handsome Dan the Bulldog is Yale's mascot. He can be found many places on Yale's campus, like looking out from his doghouse at Pauli Murray Residence College. And judging by the state of his bowl, I think he wants to be fed. One of my favorite breeds is the facetious grotesque, or the funny ones. Now, I have to say, when writing this book, I intentionally left this breed for last, assuming that it would be the easiest one to write about, because I find it the most enjoyable. However, when it came time to write this section, I quickly realized the huge distinction between telling a joke and explaining a joke. In my first attempt, I was trying to explain these grotesques, dissecting their message and at the same time stripping out all the humor. Therefore, I let this breed of grotesque speak for themselves, such as this less than literate demon on Princeton University's Dillon Gymnasium, or this drunken patriot on the University of Pennsylvania's Residence Quadrangle. Now that I think of it, this might have some of the historic breed in it, if this is supposed to represent a drunken Ben Franklin. Another personal favorite of mine are those grotesques that are just plain bizarre. The facetious grotesques are attractive because they make us laugh and feel good. But what makes these bizarre grotesques so attractive? Well, here's my theory. From childhood, we humans are taught to believe that every question has an answer and every puzzle a solution. When we come upon puzzles such as these grotesques, they become inherently interesting to us because we get preoccupied with finding their meaning, even when there may be no meaning to find, such as this baby ape in short pants on Washington University's McMillan Hall. And I just don't know what to say about this one at the University of Pennsylvania's Residence Quadrangle. The spikes are there at the top just so the birds don't land on the cornice. They were put there later, but I don't know what they were thinking when they sculpted this one. The final breed of grotesque is one that, by its very nature, gets little attention, and that's the reclusive breed. It's a type of architectural Easter egg and literally sneaks by most people. They can be as simple as abstract animals hiding in the decoration, such as these abstracted tigers' heads. The tiger is Princeton's mascot, hiding in the decor of Jones Hall. Or at Trinity, where you can find a rabbit and a monk carved underfoot into the flagstones in the floor of the cloisters at the chapel. Now that you know the general types of the grotesques, let's have a look at a few from each school of the Grotesque 10. Penn's expansive residence quadrangle is known by some as the Quad-tanic. Now, when I first heard this, I said, well, that's obvious. It's a huge, sprawling, ornately decorated residence complex. It covers almost 3 city blocks, and the west end of the quad comes to a point like the prow of a ship. Well, that's not why it was given the nickname. It was originally given the nickname the Quad-tanic by its maintenance staff, and that's because the basement always floods when it rains. One of my personal favorites at Penn is this guy at the quad. He's also on the cover of my book. This head is over 4 feet tall and mounted on the wall of a tunnel. These metal bars on either side are supports that hold the light directly in front of the sculpture. I would imagine that encountering this sculpture under harsh light late at night would be pretty unsettling. I'll also note the smaller, wacky faces on either side. On another building, the Evans Museum and Dental Institute, there are many grotesques on its walls, and some of them are a reminder of a time before painless dentistry. These statues are part of a series of 4 on the gates of the Penn Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. They were sculpted by Alexander Calder, not the artist who made the abstract mobiles from pieces of metal, rather his father, Alexander Sterling Calder, who had a more realistic style. This series is symbolic of the 4 corners of the earth from which the museum draws its artifacts. Pictured here, on the left, is Africa, and on the right, North America. Many grotesques line the entrance arches at Deering Library at Northwestern University. Some are allegoric grotesques, illustrating Aesop's fables. I'll also note the empty niches between the arches. One fable shown is called the Old and the Young Rat. According to this fable, a cunning old rat, pictured at the left, finds a trap baited with delicious cheese. He kindly offers it to a naive young rat, shown at the right. The young rat is killed when he springs the trap while trying to retrieve the cheese, leaving it available for the old rat to enjoy. The moral: do not blindly accept gifts. I'll also note the books under the trap, suggesting this fable is set in Deering Library itself. Another fable represented is called The Old Woman and the Jug. According to this fable, an elderly woman who really loves wine finds a wine jug by the side of the road. To her disappointment, it's empty, but it still contains the delightful fragrance of wine that it once held. While the moral of this one is listed as the memory of a good deed lives on, I think a woman who is sniffing empty containers she finds on the side of the road has deeper issues. These grotesques do not represent fables. Deering Library was designed as a place for serious study, represented on the left. But a browsing room was included so students could read for amusement as well, suggested by the jester's outfit on the right. Duke University's West Campus is a beautiful example of collegiate Gothic architecture. The Philadelphia architecture firm of Horace Trumbauer designed this section of campus during the 1930s. The firm's lead designer, Julian Abele, who actually designed most of these buildings, was African American. He worked in Philadelphia and never traveled to Duke's campus to see his creations because he was opposed to the Jim Crow laws that were still in effect in North Carolina at the time. The cigarette in this laughing grotesque's mouth is not part of the sculpture, but that is how I found it. And because the Duke family built much of its fortune from the tobacco trade, I thought it was appropriate, so I left it in. On the rear of Duke's original medical school building, you can find this horrified student. I like to think that this is a first-year medical student observing his first cadaver dissection. A vestibule in the residence quadrangle has a series of allegorical grotesques that convey an important overall message. That of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, and think no evil. Taken individually, these are merely classical heads sporting vague hand gestures. But these enhance the meaning of one another by being located so close, and together imply a theme: the 4 ways to avoid the many temptations inherent in college life. East Pine Hall, constructed in 1897, was among the first of Princeton's collegiate Gothic buildings. To show how serious the school was about the style of their buildings, Princeton's campus planners had to threaten to fire the architect William Potter when he wanted to build it in a different style. 1879 Hall has lots of mischievous monkeys. These are not demonstrative grotesques, as there were never any actual monkeys here. These are allegorical grotesques, depicting students as under-evolved primates, annoying a professor who is portrayed as human. This shows that Princeton professors had themselves evolved from rambunctious students. Princeton's Graduate College has these joyriding sweethearts roaring down the road in their newfangled motor car. A goose and a pig leap to get out of the way of their tires. They were called the modern youth in a New York Times article from 1927 because both were smoking, and the girl's hair is scandalously short for the time period. Their cigarettes have long since broken off, but the New York Times headline remains, that of "Girl Gargoyle Smokes." And how about these ghoulish grotesques? The decapitation on the right and the tongue twister on the left on Jolene Dormitory live up to what you'd expect of the word grotesque. This image shows Brookings Hall Tower from the Cloisters at Ridgely Hall. Brookings Hall is the school's administration building, but has some surprisingly bizarre grotesques, such as this one that has the title "The Dragon and His Unfortunate Victim." This grotesque is located over the entrance to the Anne Olin Women's Building and is of the school spirit breed. And you can see the school motto, which translates from Latin to "strength through truth." But as I said, this is located over the entrance to the building. So if you stand just outside the entrance doors and look up, you can see the underside of this grotesque and see that it hides a reclusive one, a beskirted yet mustachioed monster. Like many European Gothic cathedrals, Washington University's Graham Chapel has religious carvings on the inside, but these are balanced by many bizarre grotesques depicting the alternative to heaven on the outside. This image shows Northam Towers, part of a series of buildings at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, called the Long Walk, as seen from the chapel cloisters. The Long Walk buildings were the first buildings to be constructed on this site in 1878, and only a small part of the original plan. One of these, Seabury Hall, has this 2-headed grotesque by its entrance. It depicts male and female graduates commemorating 25 years of coeducation at Trinity. The college began admitting women in 1969, so this grotesque dates from 1994. Some Trinity buildings were built with blank spots for later carving. You can see some uncarved blanks on the towers of the chapel. Sadly, the Great Depression caught up to Trinity as it was completing construction on the chapel. There was not enough money to complete the entire plan, so some grotesque ornament was scrapped in favor of other, more practical aspects of the design. However, inside the chapel is a different story. There are many sculpted pew ends inside, and all the elements of these carvings are important in conveying their identity. This pew end finial might have looked like the small figure of a woodsman, but thanks to the sense of scale provided by the trees surrounding him, he is quickly identified as the enormous figure of Paul Bunyan. Another commemorates the chapel's primary donor, William Mather, whose ancestors came over on the Mayflower. It portrays a group of William's forebears kneeling in prayer, thanking God for their safe journey to the New World. And you can see the Mayflower in the background. But what's in the middle ground, those two figures? I'll zoom in. A settler, armed with a rifle, chases a Native American. This is based on a pun that William once told, in which he joked that that his ancestors were of the sort who, immediately after they came ashore, they fell upon their knees in prayer. Then they fell upon the Aborigines. Mather lived in a less than PC time. The University of Chicago's first campus architect, Henry Ives Cobb, gifted this gate to the school. He always had limitations imposed on him by the university trustees when designing campus buildings. However, since he used his own money for the gate, he was generous for the grotesque ornament, by including these creatures ascending the roof. There is one interpretation as to what these mean, and it goes like this. When you first come to the University of Chicago, first you have to get by the admissions officer, shown at the lower left. Then, as you ascend the ranks of the school and ascend the roof, you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, and then finally a senior at the very top. Originally home to the Department of Geology, Rosenwald Hall has two representations of the moon, each with a human character representing its age. One version on the right, the moon is shown with a child. Like the child, the moon is young and therefore has a smooth surface. This is contrasted with an older moon on the left. He is shown with an elderly man. His moon is older, so its surface has a heavy accumulation of craters. The International Building provides housing for international students. One relief depicts the flow of people from different cultures from the old world to the new by a steamship. And on the left side of this arch is a primitive man holding a club, and on the right, a modern educated scholar holding a book. The City College of New York was funded as a social experiment in 1847. The school was totally funded by taxpayers, so tuition was free and admission was based solely on academic merit. For this reason, the school was originally nicknamed the Harvard of the Proletariat. But based on buildings like Shepherd Hall here, the school was given a more modern nickname recently, that of Hogwarts in Manhattan. And if this is Hogwarts, this must be Dumbledore, on a bad day. Elsewhere, an ornithologist measures a bird skeleton on the left, and a geologist ponders crystals on the right. At the top of one of Shepherd Hall's towers, an astronomer has caught a falling star. Note the telescope in his left hand. These original buildings were constructed in the early 1900s. Notice these grotesques seem in very good condition for being exposed for more than 100 years. Well, the secret is the grotesques on the City College of New York's buildings are not the originals. Here are some of the originals. They consisted of terracotta covered in a thick, glossy glaze. From the beginning, no one liked the glossy finish, so all the grotesques were sandblasted to a matte finish. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, the sandblasting created thousands of mini cracks in the finish of the grotesques, which allowed moisture to seep in and begin to destroy the grotesque by expanding the cracks through repeated freezing and thawing. By the 1970s, these grotesques were falling apart. Starting in the 1980s, all the sculpture was taken down. Durable replacements were cast and put up. The originals were put into storage, and in the early 2000s, some were placed next to the school's architecture building. So, by a parking lot next to Spitzer Hall is a graveyard of some of the City College of New York's original grotesques. Bryn Mawr is a women's college founded in 1888 and determined to be a direct competitor to men's colleges. Important among the methods to achieve this goal was the construction of a Gothic campus. Pembroke Hall is held in high esteem as one of the finest collegiate Gothic structures in the country. This relief is a reference to Pembroke College at Oxford, which was named for William Herbert, the third Earl of Pembroke. Note the shield at the center with the three lions, the Herbert family crest, and the French phrase and Herbert family motto across the bottom, which translates to, "I will serve only one." The cloisters of the old library are encircled with many creatures, such as these two, with leathery bat-like wings. The owl is Bryn Mawr's mascot, and many versions of it can be seen in Rockefeller Hall. Here, one owl interrupts another's reading. or these owls attending class. I guess I was interrupting an important lesson when I took this photo. Yale University is an example of an historic university that has developed in conjunction with the surrounding city of New Haven, Connecticut. A few years after its founding in 1701, Yale moved to New Haven. This means that from 1718 on, the school and city grew simultaneously. After 300 years, Yale's campus has become enmeshed in the fabric of New Haven, so Yale uses architectural styles like collegiate Gothic to visually separate its buildings from those of the city. This is the tower of Yale's law school. When you see it, you immediately know it's part of Yale, because the only similar buildings in New Haven are other Yale buildings. Plus, you couldn't mistake this for an office building or a bank. The collegiate Gothic style faded in the late 1930s in favor of more modern and abstract styles, but it didn't totally disappear. Yale completed 2 residence colleges in 2017, both in the collegiate Gothic style. On Ben Franklin Residence College, you can find this series of portraits. Who are they? Well, the key to answering this lies in the abstract relief at the center. Looks like a satellite photo you might see on Google Maps or MapQuest. Look at the building in the center. Its rounded porch may look familiar. This is an overhead view of the White House city block in Washington, D.C. The Y within the White House identifies these as portraits of various Yale alumni who have occupied it. Going counterclockwise from the left, you have the 27th president, William Taft, the 38th president, Gerald Ford, the 41st president, George Bush Sr., the 42nd president, Bill Clinton, and the 43rd president, George Bush Jr. This relief decorates the outside of Pauli Murray College's lounge and depicts the hamburger as was originally intended by its creator, New Haven's Louis Lesson of Louis' Lunch, on toast without ketchup. And this pizza peel holds 2 slices. From the arrangement of the toppings, one can tell that the slices come from 2 famous New Haven pizzerias, that of Pepe's and Sally's. And personally, I like the use of the pepperoni slices as periods. Pauli Murray College alludes to the early days of computing by referencing computer pioneer and Yale alum Grace Hopper. She coined the term computer bug when she found a moth had short-circuited her computer. And modern computing is portrayed with this electronic tablet. Personally, judging by the home button, I really think it's an iPad. These are just a few of the examples of what I found at these campuses. My book has 300 pages and over 500 photos, so there are many, many more. Now, by now, you might be thinking, but Matt, does Michigan not have grotesques? Well, your library requested that I add examples from your state, which I was happy to oblige because I happen to know a fellow gargoyle hunter from your state. His name is Jeff Morrison, and he is currently writing a book which includes grotesques from Michigan State University and the University of Michigan. So the following images and information are courtesy of Jeff. On Beaumont Tower at Michigan State University, you can find the sower. This relief uses planting as a metaphor for education. And below the sculpture is the slogan, "Whatsoever a man soweth." Ancient musicians play in relief. Ancient musicians play their instruments in relief on the university's music building. On Jennison Fieldhouse at Michigan State University, there are various sports depicted in relief. From left to right, there's baseball, football, and basketball. At the University of Michigan, Rackham Graduate School has theater masks of comedy and tragedy cast in bronze on its door frames. The University of Michigan's Cook Law Quadrangle has these carvings symbolizing 4 specialities of the law. From left to right, you have a navigator for maritime law, an engineer for patent law, a soldier for military law, and a physician holding the rod of Asclepius for medical law. The designers of Cook Law Quadrangle are also depicted from the left to right: a draftsman grinding pigments, an architect, and a surveyor. This series of expressive faces are from the John P. Cook Building on Tappan Avenue, and many are based on medieval models. Now, the small one on the upper left and the two large ones are similar to those I've seen at Duke University. Since Jeff was gracious enough to let me use his images and information for this lecture, I'd like to mention his books. The images that you've just seen are from Jeff's book, The Guardians of Michigan, Architectural Sculpture of the Pleasant Peninsulas, to be released in the spring of 2022. He currently has a book out called Guardians of Detroit, Architectural Sculpture in the Motor City. It is available at guardiansofdetroit.com. And you can email Jeff at jeffbmorrison@gmail.com. Now, when I traveled to my 10 campuses, I came to see that I had a certain advantage over people who lived and worked on them every day. I found that I had the newcomer's advantage of having a fresh perspective by seeing these buildings for the first time. Many people who had met at these institutions were surprised by what I found at their own campus. To be honest, I believe this has more to do with my mindset than my powers of observation. It's very easy to become distracted and never notice the details around you, especially when your surroundings have become so familiar. By its generous use of ornament, Collegiate Gothic is an example of amazing opportunities to find intriguing things that can exist all around us and that we may overlook every day, things that, upon closer inspection, can reveal a variety of fascinating ideas and stories. What I wanted to accomplish by assembling these images is to show a few of the amazing things that you can find by merely noticing the detail around you, not just blindly accepting the way things are, but asking why things are the way they are. So look around you. You might find interesting things literally coming out of the woodwork, like these old chums inside Trinity's chapel in Hartford, Connecticut. Now, remember these guys from the beginning? My sarcastic nickname for this sculpture was Pilgrim's Progress. When I first saw it, Pilgrim's Progress looked a little different. Originally, it looked like this. This is on Sterling Memorial Library at Yale University. And in 2017, Yale was renovating Sterling. Now, Yale has had problems with political correctness in the past, so fearing controversy, the university put a blob of cement over the Puritan's rifle. This caused the controversy itself, so the whole sculpture was covered with wood. In the fall of 2019, the wood came down, and Pilgrim's Progress was gone. It was replaced by this, a grotesque depicting a tutor and a student, which is a mirror image of the original grotesque on the opposite side of the gate. Note how the book they're holding is backwards in the new version on the right. All I can say about this is, if Marty McFly from Back to the Future has taught us anything, is that you can't change the past without ruining the present. My book, The Grotesque 10, is available at thegrotesque10.com and on Amazon. And you can email me at mathew.duman@thegrotesque10.com. That's Matthew with one T. So that's my lecture. Are there any questions?
All right, I'm hopping on now. I am going to leave another little notification. It says, I have left a notification here so people can see. You should have seen like a little chat icon pop up that will show you where the chat is. You can go ahead and leave any questions there, and I will ask them once we have a couple come in. I think I'll just start off with a question of my own, watching the program, because one of the things that stood out to me the most throughout the program actually was I kind of had my mind blown with the fact about gargoyles. I had no idea they had such a practical usage, and that they had such a place in our language even. I was pretty amazed by that. And, these grotesques as they are, they seem so superfluous, like, they're very aesthetic in purpose. But, with gargoyles like that, I'm curious, do you know of any other functional grotesques like that beyond just, providing a story or like an aesthetic value? Is there anything kind of more tied to like a functional? Yeah, like that. I have curiosity.
I've seen, the only thing I can think of, there are things like door knockers on buildings and decorations on the door that are fashioned into faces. Usually those are made out of metal or wood. But those are the only other practical applications that I know of.
Yeah, as soon as you say that, it makes sense. I'm also just realizing now I never really had a word for like what a grotesque was. So now there's so many things. I'm gonna go back to like these knockers, and I'm gonna be like, oh, that's a grotesque. Like that's
really. These days when people see something like this on a building, they automatically call it a gargoyle.
Yeah.
When technically it's only the ones that channel water that are called gargoyles. There are other terms like boss, and there are a lot of other terms depending on where they're located on the building. I just really focus on grotesques and gargoyles to keep it simple.
Yeah, absolutely. We did get a couple of questions coming in. First is from C. Lou. They ask, these grotesques, were they built in place on the building, or something like built offsite and applied later on? So basically, were they like built into the structure of it, or were they added on after the fact?
Well, when I started this, I assumed that they were, carved somewhere else and then put onto the building. And that happens sometimes, but I found that a lot of them were carved, as they say, in situ, which is the stone was already up there, as I showed those blank stones, and the mason would hang up there and chip them away, which to me seems kind of incredible that they would do that, especially today. But that's what I've read. Some were sculpted like that.
That's got to be such a task.
Yeah,
to do that.
Especially when some of these are really high.
Yeah, it makes you really appreciate that level of craftsmanship.
Yes, especially since it's kind of a lost art today.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, do we know if like on these universities that have so, benefited from this practice or like used it so long, do they have any programs in like their architecture classes, or is there any presence trying to kind of preserve those? Like, I'm not sure if that would really have popped up in your studies, but it makes me curious if, the ones that have used it so much are continuing that in some way.
Well, most modern architects, they view gargoyles and grotesques as kind of very sentimental and superfluous, and they really go for the modern form and function type thing of modern architecture. But there are, especially on college campuses, especially on important buildings on college campuses, they do restore these grotesques and gargoyles. But as I say, it's on important buildings. So you can look on some other less important buildings, and you can see ones that are kind of disintegrating.
Yeah.
And I always like to tell this story. I was doing this lecture before COVID in person in Connecticut, and a person asked a question. First, he asked if I worked for Yale, and I said no, I don't. He wanted to get that out of the way because he said a friend of his was a contractor at Yale, and he was moving a ladder and he smashed one of these things. So that happens too.
That's fantastic.
And I've seen the ones that are low, that are within reach. I've seen them with like googly eyes pasted on them, and all sorts, and lipstick on them and things like that. So they do go through a lot of wear and tear.
Yeah, that's really, it's funny to me too, the idea that you might have like photographed something like that, and then somebody's like, oh, I smashed I knew this person that smashed it. You're like, oh, that's what happened to that.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
That's really funny. Mary has a question. They ask, are the grotesque, they ask, are they carved on site or offsite and then applied to the building. So essentially the same thing, but I think that's another interesting question. Like, since they're carved on the buildings themselves, like, I suppose I wonder how much work goes into it, like offsite. Like, do you know if there's any sort of, I guess, like, I guess I'm curious, what kind, do you know if there's any kind of preemptive work that happens? Like, how long in advance do you think they have to be planning these grotesques in particular before
when it comes to, again, with the more important buildings on campus, I've read where, like the library or something that's like the centerpiece of the university. I've read, like, at the University of Chicago, they had committees made up of people from the architect, representatives from the architect, representatives from the faculty and administration of the university, all sat down to decide what iconography went on the building. And something like that would be there'd be a lot of planning that went into it. Other times, for lesser buildings, sometimes it seemed obvious that they just let the masons do whatever they wanted. Because I've seen some very strange things on the buildings, which I love, and things like hidden within the decoration and things, which I think is great.
It's funny, they don't spend as much time on them, but those almost kind of become the hidden gems you want to go out and
find. Well, because I noticed a lot of them are funny, and you're like sharing a joke with someone over, like 80 years ago, which I thought was great.
That's fantastic. We have more from CLU. They say, so you mentioned a couple of people by name during that, so that's a good question of, were there specific carvers or creators that were sought out for their skill? Because you say, some contractors, they just kind of let do whatever, but were there some where they were like, we need this person to, like, carve up a grotesque, like, we want this architect's eye on this?
Well, I've done a lot of research, and there really wasn't a lot. There's a lot written about college architecture in general, but not so much written about grotesques and gargoyles. A few names that I did find was René Chambellan, who did a lot of architectural sculpture in New York and Chicago. And another name was Lee Laurie, who did a lot of architectural sculpture. And he was I think he was a sculpture professor at Yale University. But then when I read these, I found that those names, it says they were in charge of the sculpture. So that doesn't mean they actually did every one themselves. I'm kind of picturing them with a bunch of masons working under them who actually did most of the work.
That makes sense.
So yeah, I was one time before COVID, when I would do this live, a woman stopped into one of my presentations before. She said she couldn't stay for the presentation, but she wanted to talk to me because her grandfather, his name is Michael Martino, did a lot of the sculpture at Yale. And I thought that was great, because a lot of, as I said, the names really of the masons don't really survive. So I did also find that, especially at Yale had a big building boom in the early 1930s. And I was like, well, how can they afford to do that right in the middle of the Great Depression?
Yeah.
Well, I found, there's an area of New Haven where Yale is located called Worcester Street, which is kind of a lot of Italian immigrants settled there in the 19th century. And during the Great Depression, a lot of people are out of work. So Yale got a lot of artisans, Italian artisans, for a lot less money, because they were really desperate for work. So they were able to get a lot of great artwork done for less money.
Yeah, that's interesting, just to see how it all comes together. And it's fascinating too that it's like these grotesques, I think for a lot of people, are what stand out the most about these buildings, and yet in a lot of cases we don't even know who actually was sculpting these things. So it's kind of crazy how they get kind of lost in the shuffle thing.
I mean, I've grown up around Yale University, and I always liked the buildings. I didn't really think too much about them growing up, but they were really neat.
Yeah.
But it was only later when I started looking at the detail that I saw all of this sculpture that I've never noticed before. And it gave me a new appreciation for things like that.
And that's cool to see you highlighting those things like that.
Yeah.
You that stood out so much to you. And I'm sure people now are like, whoa, that's great. I never noticed that.
And it's strange. You look at them and you really don't know what they mean. And then it's kind of like looking at a riddle, because you're really not sure. And then all of a sudden, bang, it hits you all at once. Like the meaning is so obvious. And it's really like, it's almost like you're a detective finding the meaning of these things. And sometimes you can't find the meanings of them, but it's amazing what you can find right out on the walls, right in front of people. But people don't see them.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one from Silu, I said, were there any carvers who were so bad at the craft that they were fired from the job? Anything that like they just put, and maybe one of those bizarre ones that you're just like, they put that up, they're like, what is this?
I really don't know. That's a good question. I really, because not too many names survive even of the good Masons. So I doubt they would have preserved the names of the ones that didn't make the cut.
It'd have to be particularly bad, I think.
Yeah, I think it was one of the stone carving was one of those arts you started as an apprentice and you kind of worked your way up. So as you gained experience and skill. So I'm sure there was many people working with them with various varying degrees of experience. And I'm sure if some inexperienced person did something that wasn't great, maybe somebody else would fix it up. That's another thing. A lot of times, multiple people would work on one grotesque.
Absolutely. We have a comment from Terry that says it was a really interesting presentation. Appreciate your sense of humor, which was really fun. And,
thank you so much. That's what I like. What attracted me to these grotesques was their sense of humor. So I like to carry that through in the presentation. That's
fantastic. And it really shone through, I think. Like I really got a sense of your appreciation for them. And like what stood out about them to you. It was really personal look at them. And I really enjoyed that. Joyce asks, what is your screen background?
Oh, and I have to, whenever somebody asks, I have to fight the urge to look behind me. But, my screen background is Rockefeller College at Princeton. It's the Cloisters at Rockefeller College. And I added the foliage just myself, just for the safari feed.
Excellent. Well, does anybody else have any last minute questions for us here? And I'll wait a moment for those to kind of roll in. All right. I think that answers all our questions tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you, Mathew, do you have any last minute things you wanted to, say to everyone? Maybe you want to point to your book one more time, something like that before we call it a night?
Okay. Well, the one thing that I like to leave everybody with is to look at the detail around you. Pay attention to your surroundings and look at the detail, because you'll find a lot of amazing things that, especially in very familiar places places where you work or live, we kind of don't pay attention to surroundings when they're very familiar. But when you're going, or even anywhere, just pay attention to the surroundings, and you'll find a lot of interesting detail with a lot of very interesting stories. And as I said before, my book is called The Grotesque 10. It's available at thegrotesque10.com and on Amazon. And my email is Mathew, that's Mathew, .Duman at thegrotesque10.com.
All right, that's great. And I think even pointing that out of paying attention to little things, I think that's one thing maybe we could all find a little more enriching when, for a lot of us, pretty much the majority of where we're going these days is home and work. Like maybe that would give us at least something to look forward to being in these places.
under normal times, before COVID, I also do tours of Yale University. And a lot of times people who actually have, spent 4 years there, or people who have grown up in the area are older than me, comment at the end of the tour, like, I've been here 50 years and I've never noticed any of these things. And it's just because people just don't, the surroundings become so familiar and people just don't look at the detail. A lot of them are out in plain sight. It's just that you don't really see them.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good message to leave with. And I think I'd like to just take a moment to thank you, Mathew, for this presentation. It was really fun. I had a great time. I hope you all enjoyed it as well. Thank you all for attending. We hope to see you at any of our other upcoming presentations. Like I said, we have one coming up next week on March 2nd about with Rochester Area Youth Assistance about the dangers of prescription drug and alcohol abuse. So please tune in if you're interested. And I'm just going to say thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Mathew, for this presentation. And I hope you all have a great night.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.